Welcome to day 8 and our continuation of our study of Africa. Africa, that huge country that we talked about is being known as the Dark Continent yesterday. Today we're going to look at a little bit more and put a little more light on this continent. We talked about Africa being largely a plateau, which made it hard for explorers and settlers to originally get into the continent. Other feature that you need to know about Africa is the Big Divide. The Big Divide is the Sahara Desert. The Sahara Desert pretty much looks like this. All of this is a desert. It serves to really divide Africa into two parts. Up here you have largely Muslim Africa. This is very close to Europe. Now, people think what divides Europe from Africa is the Mediterranean, and that is true in a physical feature. But the real divide within Africa is that Sahara Desert. You have a very different culture up here that you do down here. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go along. Speaking of geographical features, what is this? If you said Mediterranean, you are absolutely right. What is this? If you said Red Sea, you are absolutely right. What connects the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea right here? If you said Suez Canal, you are absolutely correct. What is this little strait right here? You said Strait of Gibraltar. Good job. What's this big ocean out here? You said Atlantic. You are right. And this ocean over here is, of course, the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean. Okay. We'll keep reviewing these because you'll need them all for your test. Yesterday, we talked about this country, Egypt, and we talked about the Nile River. I asked the question, when I asked the question on the test, what is the longest river in the world? The answer will, of course, be the Nile. What I didn't mention yesterday was the capital. On the test, you're going to need to know 20 capitals. I will give you a list of 40 important countries, and of that 40, you need to come up with 20 capitals. You'll find this is pretty easy. You already know a bunch of them, and kids always get all of those right. But the capital of Egypt is Cairo, C-A-I-R-O, Cairo. Okay, is the capital of Egypt. So what's the capital of Egypt? Yep, Cairo. Good job. Okay, and we talked about Libya yesterday. Libya, in the middle of a big civil war, you don't want to go there. All right, today we're going to take a look at Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and a place you've never heard of, Western Sahara. Okay, let's start with Tunisia. All right, Tunisia has been in the news. 10 years ago, Tunisia was not a very happy country. It was poor. It had a dictator, a guy named Ben Ali, who was basically kind of a jerk. And we had a young man named Benassusi. He had a tough life. Mohammed Bouazizi was the oldest son in a large family, and unhappily the father died. Now, Bouazizi wanted to be an engineer. However, when his father died, there was nobody to support the family, and as the eldest son, it was his job to go to work. But he has no skills, so he manages to find a cart. And every morning he gets up early in the morning, he goes out into the countryside, he buys vegetables and stuff from the farmers, and he brings it back into the city, and he becomes a street vendor. Well, to be a street vendor in Tunisia, you need a permit. Got to have a license, not just anybody can go out and sell stuff on the street. Well, Sisi can't afford a license. And so he's constantly having to hide from the police. When he sees them, he quickly runs around the corner with his little cart. But, you know, you can't hide forever. And every once in a while, the police would catch up with him and threaten to take his cart. And he will offer them a bribe. He can't afford a bribe, but he will offer them a bribe to keep himself in business. And this is his life, you know, pretty miserable life, not really what he had seen for himself, but, you know, he's going to support his family. Well, one day he is out selling his vegetables and they get some hard-nosed cop that isn't going to take a bribe. They come, he has no permit. They seize his vegetables, seize his cart, and what's the kid going to do now? Okay, he's got no way to support his family. He goes down to the police station and tries to appeal his case, saying, hey, look, I need that cart. I mean, I just pay a fine or something, and they don't have anything to do with it. In fact, I read one reference that a female officer there slapped him, which is a big insult in the Arab Muslim world. What's he going to do? He's got a few coins left in his pocket. He goes down to a gas station, buys a gallon of gas, comes back in front of the government offices, pours the gasoline over his head, and lights himself up. People going by see this, and you know, everybody whips out their phones. You know, some people go and try and put the fire out and save the kid. Others whip out the phones and get this all videoed, and it goes viral immediately. And at first, Ben Ali, the president, he acts like a real jerk. He says, yeah, kid sets him on fire. You know, if more of these vagrants would set themselves on fire, the country would be better off. Comes across like a real jerk, and the Tunisians get really upset. Huge protests in the street. Well, Ben Ali, he immediately tries to backtrack, and he has himself filmed by Ben Ali's bedside, and with Ben Ali's mother promising that he's going to get the best medical care possible. Well, it's too late now. The people can see through this. They can see what a big phony the guy is. And so they continue these protests. And then a couple of days later, Bouazizi dies. And Ben Ali realizes, okay, it's time for me to get out of here. All dictators, you remember, you got to be ready to run. So he jumps in his plane with lots of gold and cash and flies away. Well, this has gone viral all across the world, but particularly across North Africa and the Middle East. And then it's picked up by one of the interesting news agencies of the world, a place called, or a network called Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is famous throughout the Middle East and North Africa for their news coverage because they are like Western news media. They try to tell the truth. They try to tell what's going on. In most of these Middle East, North Africa countries, they're dictatorships, and the media is simply a tool of the government to put across the message they want. Al Jazeera doesn't do that. And so everybody in the Middle East tunes into Al Jazeera. We'll talk more about Al Jazeera a little bit later. But Al Jazeera puts this even more out. And all of these North Africa, Middle East countries start to have their own protests. Some of those protests actually evolve into revolts. I mentioned Libya yesterday. After the Arab Spring, yeah, they killed Muammar Gaddafi, and now that's in a civil war. Egypt saw its president forced to resign. They had an election. They had an elected president that didn't last very long before the military threw him out, and it's a military dictatorship again. Yemen had a civil war develop. We'll talk about Yemen later. Iraq was having protests. Bahrain was having protests. In fact, Bahrain thought it was going to be overthrown until the Saudis came in and saved them. Probably the most famous one is Syria. Syria started having a revolt that turned into a huge civil war, which is still going on today, and which we will talk about more later. All of this was the Arab Spring. Now, 10 years later, some of the civil wars are still going on, but most of the governments are back to being military dictatorships with not democracies. The only democracy in North Africa, Tunisia. Tunisia. Okay? So that's Tunisia. Next door is Algeria. Algeria is kind of a famous place to take vacations. Actually, Algeria and Morocco. I've never been to Algeria, but I had a friend that went, and he said they did the coolest thing. Of course, remember, we've got Sahara Desert. Okay, Sahara Desert's all in here. He says what they do is you can choose either to go by camel or by dune buggy, depending on, you want an authentic experience, or if you just want to ride around in dune buggies. You get into caravan and you go out into the desert. So you go and you get out there and you come up over a sand dune and there is a camp and they've got nice tents, not Muammar Gaddafi nice, but they have nice tents. It's not camping, it's what's the word, glamping. Nice tents. They have a big fire out there and they have a sheep roasting on a spit and they have little dancing girls and they give you an Algerian authentic desert nomadic meal, which he said really was pretty good. And then they put on a little show for you. But the big feature is the night sky. And so once the sun has gone down, they camp out the fire and then you look at the stars and they point out the constellations and that kind of stuff. But the stars are just magnificent. The air is super clear. There's no light pollution. He says it's one of the neater things he's done, and I'd like to do it someday too. Okay, so that's Algeria. Over here we have Morocco. Morocco, another big tourist place. You may have heard of Marrakesh. Morocco, just across the Strait of Gibraltar from Europe. And you get lots of Europeans that will go vacation in Morocco. It's warm and Europeans get a whole lot more vacation time than Americans do. Basically, every European gets a month off and they flood down around the Mediterranean, including into, excuse me, into Morocco. Okay, so this is Morocco. And right next to it, we have the interesting little place called Western Sahara. Okay, Western Sahara has got an interesting history. Let me pull up a different little slide here for you. And I'll just give the quick and dirty to you on Western Sahara. Okay, Western Sahara, like almost all of Africa, was colonized in the late 1800s. Western Sahara was colonized by Spain, which controlled it for a long time. After World War II, the colonies start to break away. So in the 1880s, we have the era of colonization. After World War II, we have the era of decolonization, and it goes on for about 30 years. The people in Western Sahara, the people called the Sahrawi, hope I said that right, Sahrawi, they want to be free. And they're protesting and asking for their independence. And in 1965, this says the US asked for Spain. That is not correct. It is the UN. Let's make that a capital. And where did it go? There we go. Let's make that a capital N. Okay, 1965, the UN asked Spain to free Western Sahara. Spain considered it for 10 years, and in 1975, they pulled out. Now, why would they pull out? Well, it was costing them more than it was worth. There is not a whole lot in Western Sahara. There's some fishing, there's some phosphate mining, but there's not much there. And the Sahrawi people were protesting and starting a guerrilla movement to fight and force the Spanish out. And so the Spanish said, it's not worth it. We're out of here. So 75, Spain pulls out. Sahrawis are really excited for a very short time. They think they've got their country free, but now Morocco to the north and Mauritania to the south decide that they want Western Sahara. And so they go in, they grab big chunks of it. The Sahrawi continue to fight against both of them. And Mauritania, they're quicker learners than the Moroccans. They realize that there's nothing here. That's what the Spain had already figured out. There's nothing here, and we don't really want to spend money fighting the Sahrawis. And so they pulled out. Well, as soon as they pulled out in 79, Morocco came in and grabbed what they had left. Well, the Sahrawis continued to conduct guerrilla warfare against the Moroccans, and it went on year after year after year, just a low-key battle, but a constant irritant to the Moroccans, constantly costing money and costing lives, until finally the UN stepped in and arranged a ceasefire. And that is the way it has stood for a long, long time, right up to the present day. Morocco controls about 2/3 of the country, and that's the part of the country that's along the Atlantic coast. There's not much good in any place in the country, but what little is good is in that 2/3. The third that the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic controls, that third is the third away from the phosphate mines, away from the ocean where they have the fishing, and there's really not much there. Most of the Sahrawi people who are fighting against Morocco actually live in Algeria. Now, Algeria and Morocco haven't gotten along for years, not fighting each other, but they don't like each other. And so Algeria is more than happy to help out the Sahrawi people by providing them refugee camps, just as an irritant to Morocco. Well, most of these poor Sahrawi people have lived there for decades. The men go to Europe where they work in low-skilled, low-paying jobs and come back to visit the family a couple times a year, basically send money back to support their families. Nobody recognizes Morocco's right to control Western Sahara, but nobody's going to do anything about it because nobody's going to go to war over it. So it pretty much just is ignored and has continued that way for decades. Western Sahara is about 500,000 people. Most live in one city, Laayoune, and still the big thing is fishing and some phosphate mining. So that's a short and dirty on Western Sahara. Okay, let's go back to the map. All right, so far we have covered this part of Africa. These are the things you need to know. Remember, the capital of Egypt is Cairo. Egypt is one of those 40 countries. Remember, you only have to know 20 of the capitals, so no Cairo. That's an easy one to remember. But you need to be familiar and be able to locate all of these countries on a blank map. Had a student that came up with the way that that he found useful to remember these countries. He came up with Western Saharans make all Tunisians like Egyptians. Western Saharans make all Tunisians like Egyptians. Okay, Western Saharans, Western Sahara. The M in make is Morocco. The A in all stands for Algeria. Tunisians, duh, must be Tunisia. The L in like is Libya. And Egyptians, again, duh, is Egypt. Western Saharans make all Tunisians like Egyptians. So if that helps you remember those, great. If it doesn't, just memorize them any way that works for you. Thanks for being with me, and I will see you in our next lecture. Have a good day.